Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan, and today we continue our How to Survive series by looking at another very famous battle. In our last episode, we looked at the terrible trench warfare during the Battle of Endor. In today's episode, we'll be looking at the equally terrifying force of Endor. Just a reminder before we start, this video is not about being a hero or even being honorable. This is a video about being practical and preserving one's life above all else, even if that means being a coward. Because again, we care about you viewers and all you troopers out there. There's no need to be a hero. Leave that kind of stuff up for the guy with plot armor. This video will be split into 4 sections. First, we'll be talking about the background of the battlefield location and the area surrounding it. Then we'll be looking at the enemy combatants that you will be facing. Then we will be talking about the equipment and training that will help you prepare for the situation. And finally, what you need to do to survive. The forest moon of Endor was never supposed to be a battlefield. It was a remote moon located in the outer rim far away from civilization. Now, since the old Republic era, teams of raiders, poachers, and hunters would venture to the planet for highly sought Ewok meat. The Ewok's meat and fur were considered delicacies in the outer rim, and Ewok jerky was considered one of the best forms of preserved meat. Due to the high fat concentration in Ewoks, even after they're dried up, their meat still retains a bit of juiciness that you can't really get with some plain Nerf jerky. Shortly after the destruction of the first Death Star over Yavin 4, the Emperor began planning the construction of the second Death Star. They had learned quite a lot from completing the first Death Star, including the many logistical challenges one needs to overcome in a project of this size. It was relatively difficult to hide the construction of such a large object. Dozens of planets had to be mined and stripped clean for the necessary materials. Such large quantities of building material and metal moving through the shipping lanes would attract attention from the rebel spy network. This is why the Empire spent a lot of resources trying to cover up this movement. They even created a secret hyperspace lane that went from the world of Solus to the forest moon of Endor. Solus was a heavy industry world which already imported a large amount of raw resources. The Imperials hoped that this would be a good cover for all the material for the Death Star 2 project, which would be rerouted from Solus through that secret hyperspace lane eventually to Endor. The second Death Star was quite vulnerable during the construction phase. It had several gaps in its hull and its anti-ship defense system. And so a temporary planetary shield was projected onto the battle station from a nearby moon. It's unknown why the Empire chose the forest moon of Endor when there were 8 other moons to choose from. This moon was less than 4,900 kilometers in diameter, less than half the size of the Earth. Its surface was covered in forests, savannas, and mountains, and a few small oceans. Its air was breathable, and besides the dangerous wildlife, it was relatively easy to live there. The Empire chose one of the most heavily forested areas on the planet to build their shield generator, and while it provided a great deal of concealment, it also made it very easy for the enemy forces to infiltrate the area. The main inhabitants on the planet were known as Ewoks. These were barely sentient, 1-meter-tall furry bear-like creatures who lived in small tribes with Stone Age technology. In the heavily forested areas like where the Battle of Endor took place, the Ewoks lived in complicated networks of tree houses which were connected together, creating an elevated village. These were oftentimes camouflaged and hard to see from the ground. Their society revolved around hunting and gathering, and despite their small size, they were quite strong and formidable fighters. The average Ewok warrior was strong enough to take down a full-grown human with just a rock or spear. The Ewoks also have primitive bows and stone-tipped arrows. They also have the ability to create all sorts of deadly traps, which they use to capture and kill some of the larger local wildlife. Ewoks also had an incredible sense of smell and could track individuals from scent alone from miles away. Although they generally hunted, fished, and foraged during the day, their senses were quite in tune with nocturnal hunting as well. Each village or tribe was usually led by a chief and medicine man, or some kind of spiritual leader. The Ewoks worshipped trees and were also easily duped by the presence of technology. On one occasion, they even worshipped the protocol droid as a deity of some kind. But don't underestimate the Ewoks' diminutive size and primitive culture. These little furry beasts were built for killing things and were a lot more dangerous than they looked. It was said that the Ewoks were so durable that they could even survive jumping down 100 feet from the tree canopies down to the ground. Supporting the Ewoks was a small team of rebel pathfinders. Generally speaking, the quality of rebel infantry varied very greatly from unit to unit. Most of the time, these units lacked discipline and skills and were really no better than a bunch of street thugs or pirates. The Rebel Pathfinders were definitely a more standardized unit and considered special forces by the Alliance to restore the Republic. The Pathfinders were technically commandos that were trained in infiltration and asymmetrical warfare. But just a quick glance at their movement and spacing, and I'm pretty skeptical about how dangerous they actually are. Most likely what we're looking at are just regular Rebel infantry with some survival training to allow them to operate without resupply. A few Pathfinders also fought in the Rogue One mission under Captain Cassian Andor, and based on their actions during that battle, I would say they're probably no more skilled than your average Imperial Army trooper. Despite the fact that these Rebel Pathfinders were equipped with modern weapons, I would still consider the Ewoks a bigger threat. If you guys want a bit more information on fighting against the Ewoks, we did an entire video just about how to fight and hunt them. I actually had to go to Endor to do the research myself. It was terrifying. I basically cried myself to sleep every night in a cave and pissed my pants on numerous occasions. And to this day, I cannot walk in a densely forested area without constantly scanning the treetops. Now, forest biomes actually create a very challenging battlefield for the average soldier. Unlike most natural terrain, densely packed forests force combatants to fight at much closer ranges. Some tacticians might even consider this as a form of CQC battle. Fortunately, on Endor, the trees are massive, and so they're not really densely packed together, although the underbrush is considerable and can obstruct your view. In these types of situations, usually whoever spots the enemy first will come out victorious. So stealth and camouflage again are going to be key. Ditch the white Stormtrooper armor and find some camouflage uniforms and armor. I would also ditch the helmet because not only does it limit your visibility, it might also limit your hearing if you don't have the proper enhancements built into it. You'll also need all of your senses intact. Sometimes just observing the wildlife will tell you if a large enemy presence is nearby. And because the Ewoks are involved, not only will you have to constantly scan the forest floor, you'll also have to look vertically into the tree canopies. Again, infrared will be useful, especially at night, but it'll also be useful during the day to help you separate enemy fighters from the forest background. Soldiers who grew up on urban planets like Coruscant, whose eyes aren't adjusted to forest environments, will especially benefit from this type of gear. Without it, most likely they'll be overwhelmed by their surroundings and won't be able to spot any unnatural things in the forest background. As far as weapons go, your usual range of blasters will be more than capable enough to function in these types of environments. Although if you are traveling in smaller groups and relying on stealth or trying to carry out an ambush, forest environments do a great job of disorienting those who aren't used to fighting in them. The trees and numerous obstacles also do a great job at confusing people acoustically, making it a terrific place to ambush people. The only problem is that blaster rounds are basically tracer rounds and will immediately reveal your position. Colorless blaster rounds are unrealistically expensive, so once again, slug throwers make a good alternative weapon, especially if you're trying to remain stealthy or carry out an ambush. I would also bring some camouflage netting and scent concealer. The Ewoks might still be able to see and smell their way through your disguise, but it might limit how far they can detect you from. Camouflage netting can also be turned into ghillie suits as well should you need more concealment. I also recommend you bring some climbing gear and maybe a grappling gun. Once night hits, you will not survive on the forest floor. It's best to make camp up in the tree canopy. Also bring the standard Imperial medkit with antitoxins. The Ewoks were known to use neurotoxins on their blades and arrows. Now, the Empire completely underestimated the Ewok threat during the Battle of Endor. After capturing the Rebel Pathfinder team, they basically thought the battle was over and lined up in parade formation for some reason. When the Ewoks started their ambush and crazy war cries, it was a terrifying experience for those caught in the middle of it. For one, the Ewok battle horns made it sound like the woods were alive with thousands of these critters, and when the volleys of arrows started raining down on the Stormtroopers, discipline was quickly lost. Well, first, the arrows actually can't penetrate Stormtrooper armor. It can, however, go through the joint areas, and a few unlucky Stormtroopers went down, causing immediate panic. Second, the Empire was not combat ready at this time. Again, they were in parade formation. Everyone is far too bunched up and everyone is blocking each other's field of fire. Now, the best thing you can do as a Stormtrooper in this situation is not panic and try to gather the soldiers around you and create a defensive formation. While the enemy is strong, their ranged weapons are relatively harmless, which means they will have to get pretty close to get a kill. So as long as you're in a pretty clear area and you're dug in well and have your team members watching the other angles, it's pretty hard to get overwhelmed. It's only when you have breakdown of discipline and individuals are panicking and running off by themselves that you'll start seeing casualties. so at least during the day, survival against the Ewoks shouldn't be all that hard. At nighttime, when the Ewoks are much harder to spot, especially in the tree canopy, things can get a bit crazier. The goal here is to either move into a large clearing or try to make it out of the forest, or at least into a cave, where you can limit the approach vectors of the enemy forces. And should you not have enough time to make it out of the forest, fire is your one and only friend if you're not equipped with night vision or infrared. So once again, it's important to know your enemy and not be terrified by their psychological warfare. The Ewoks actually are not tough enemies because they do lack decent range weapons. They are small targets, but if you can hit them, they're pretty easy to take down. Anyway guys, don't forget to subscribe for more awesome content here on Generation Tech. We're going to be looking at more how to survive videos in a variety of different galactic battle situations. Thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.